So as he said, my name is Ryan Slack. I'm the Director of Sales at Signature Control Systems. We're a Tiba value-added reseller. We're based out of Columbus, Ohio, but we're the dealer for Tiba parking systems in upstate New York now. So I have a presentation today that talks about, we'll kind of go through the history of what back-end technology has been. I'm going to skip over the cigar box days and go more towards the technology with physical servers. And then we'll get into kind of what has come next, which has been a phenomenon really the last couple of years, especially in parking when it comes to cloud hosting, and then really where the rest of the world is going and where the parking industry is going to, or at least certain parts of it are going when it comes to computing and what that data, how that data is actually processed and decisions are made. If you have questions, feel free to interrupt at any point. I think we have the online ones at the end, but if you have any questions here in person throughout the presentation, you can interrupt me. Feel free. So historically, we had, I'm sure a lot of parking offices that you've been in might have looked like that at one point, maybe actually bigger servers at one point too. Where we had like an on-site license for a workstation that you had to be on site to do anything. You had to come down from your office to run reports. If there was an issue with somebody on site with a problem in the lanes, you had to come on site and maybe drive from home, maybe staff 24/7 depending on the location. So that's kind of where it started when parking technology took off. Eventually, we were able to get VPN access where you would remote in and you'd be able to at least kind of basically access your workstation from afar. So you're able to do that a little bit. There's obviously were some IT concerns. If anybody here works at a hospital, airport, anything like that, VPN is a 4-letter word for them, especially those locations. If that workstation ever died, which it did, my hard drive on my laptop crashed last week, and I had to recreate this entire presentation Monday night to get it to dawn by my midnight deadline, which was awesome after 6 hours in the car to get here. It also required updates for your operating system to be done locally, so there was no pushing remote updates. There was no anything remote. You had to roll a truck for everything. For us dealers, that meant money in the bank. For you, that meant another painful invoice that you obviously were hoping to avoid. Eventually then, as kind of these things kind of took place and technology started to move to a more remote way of doing things, virtual servers came in, where you would have virtual server, universities are big on this, where they're actually going to do their own hosting and they have their own redundancies, and you're loading it onto their virtual server. So it's access anywhere really on their domain, on their network, by the owner. Sometimes the operator got into it, a third-party IT company, but there was no more, I had to be at this right here. I would remote in on my network, and there were rules in place. So, you know, there was redundancy required for that. I use laptop, but workstation backup, which we talked about, and then internet along with IT permissions. Like there was some rules that it got better, but it still was kind of difficult. But there was, one of the benefits was there was no subscription fees. All of those costs were kept in-house, are kept in-house. This is still a viable option today. So you could maintain costs. There were no SaaS fees, anything like that. If you're in parking, you've heard a lot of that lately. And then we got into cloud hosting, which has been around since I held up my cell phone before. The iCloud was really what, if you remember when it first came out, everybody was like taboo. Everybody hated it. It was a negative. A lot of people were like, no way is this going to work. And now that iCloud from Apple is really how it got into the hands of the layperson. Has now taken off. So cloud hosting is typically a third party. Amazon Web Services is big, Microsoft Azure, Google, there's some smaller ones, but basically the main players are the big ones for this. Benefit of this is remote access anywhere you have network in the world. So to a garage manager, I apologize, but now you can, if you're on vacation in Hawaii, you can still get that intercom call to your cell phone and you can remote in. Owners like Rick, that might be music to your ears that you don't have to hire somebody in that case. So there are monthly SaaS subscription fees. You know, when I sell it, one of my pitches is it's really kind of an insurance policy also. You're always getting your update software. You always have that going on, and you don't have to worry about it in-house. When something is an issue, it's your provider that's on the hook for it. Now we do requires redundancy for network and cloud outages. We'll talk about cloud outages, but network, internet goes out, cloud goes down, that's an issue. In the parks world, a lot of companies are doing cellular redundancy now. I'm not going to talk a lot about what Tiba does. I'm only going to mention us a couple of times, just to give you a real life example of what we're doing, but we'll come back to that in a little bit. So we talked about kind of where we came from, and now here we are with cloud hosting, and there's a reason for that. There's benefits to it. If a physical server was the best option, they wouldn't come out with new ideas, right? Just like if not wearing seatbelts or having a third front seat in your car was the best way to do things, there'd probably still be a third front seat like I had in my first ever car, which was a Dodge Intrepid. So the reliability of cloud hosting, you don't ever have a server crash. There's no, my hard drive crashed and I was without a computer for like a week. That is a pain. In my world, I was fortunately on my cell phone, but if that's your garage, you're scrambling to find somebody to get on site to operate old school out of that cigar box I referenced before. In our case, probably off of a handheld now that we have for redundancy. There's no operating system being sunset. You don't hear about Windows XP anymore. That's extinct. That's what we call a sunset. There's no upgrades required. How many times do you get on your computer and you've got a notification that your computer requires a restart? That's now local. That doesn't affect your operation, where that restart might take 2, 3, 4 hours depending on how many times you've hit remind me again in 7 days, remind me again in 7 days. At some point it's going to force restart and you're going to be down for a while. There's also no workstation licenses. So if you wanted redundancy, you had a couple managers and they had different workstations, it was a different license with a different fee every single time. So it's more secure too. We call it most secure of our options, but it's certainly more secure than what we had before. So there's no on-site server exposed to hacking, a fire, a disaster, anything like that. There's a unique login and password. Just like everything you have in your life, there is a way to log in. Obviously your password can get hacked, but the idea here is you're protecting that the way you should be. You can limit access to certain areas within the system. For example, if you want finance to have access to do their reporting because you don't want your manager doing it, you probably don't want finance having access to raising and lowering gates. So you can restrict access that way. That way when Mr. or Mrs. CFO gets in, she's not accidentally raising a gate without knowing it, and that gate's up for 4 hours, and 4 hours worth of revenue goes out the door. And then there's obviously extensive backup redundancy, server farms all over the world, all over the country, depending on who you do business with. So if there is a disaster at your location, but your garage is still functioning, we've had floods, hurricanes, stuff like that, and you lose your head end, your data is not gone forever either. It's backed up elsewhere. It's most efficient. So we talked about rolling a truck before. Stuff is pushed remotely. We can schedule that. Firmware software updates can be done at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday night when nobody's in the garage. So that in a lot of cases, depending on how your system's designed, I'm going to reference parks a lot, but this also applies like parking guidance and beyond. You can schedule those updates. Some companies won't let you. Some companies might try to relieve liability for that. But the idea here is with cloud hosting, you can schedule stuff to push out when it's convenient for the customer. Our goal in parking, we're not in parking, the reason we're the industry is it's a revenue generator, right? If not, we'd all be Walmart with free parking in our parking lots. So our goal is with this is to reduce downtime. You can remote access, no truck going out, no additional fees, no trip charge, no hourly rate, no my tech's sitting there for 4 or 5 hours while the computer does everything, but because the tech is on site, you get billed for 4 or 5 hours. That's the idea behind it. So that's also quicker response times. When something happens, tech can remote in immediately. There's no, I got to get to my truck and I got to drive down like we talked about before. Cheaper service contracts too, right? So if I'm inherently building in hours to a service contract expecting what I know is going to be a monthly, quarterly update from Microsoft, I no longer have to do that. So inherently the service contracts should be cheaper. And then obviously remote management of sites. So now as we get into automation, which has been a big topic for years now in the industry, one manager can manage 5 or 6 different locations from one location, from one login, one unique login from an enterprise level. So it reduces head end. And especially where labor shortage right now in any industry, but especially in our market. I was talking to somebody yesterday, half of their labor is open right now in their department and they are having trouble filling it. It's proven. I talked about the iCloud being taboo before. It's not anymore. Cloud is requested or required in a lot of bids now. So there's confidence in this that we had before. Decades of history of cloud, but in our industry there's years now, especially, and it's used in all sectors. If I'm going to reference later on in this, hedge funds, healthcare, places that billions of dollars are relying on, daily lives are relying on data and on technology. It's being used there. So we joke all the time in parking, this isn't brain surgery. You're right, but they're using this kind of stuff to process data for brain surgeries, for healthcare. So we'll come back to that in a second also. In a lot of cases, some people see it as more reliable than hardware. We talked about that disaster recovery, talked about crashing before. So when cloud hosting came out, it was basically a place to store data, and you had to go get it. That kind of then transformed into cloud computing, where the data was sitting in the cloud, and then all of a sudden decisions needed to be made on how to process that data. It went from data storage to data processing. So cloud hosting is literally virtual data storage. So it eliminates risk of catastrophe, stuff that we've talked about. There's also single tenant and multi-tenant platforms as to how that data is accessed. We'll talk a little bit about that too. And then also what it does is the API integrations. For us, it would be our hardware and software integrating with the likes of Pay by Phone, Park Mobile, some of you in the room, are global. So when we roll out integrations and we make updates, everybody benefits from that. It's not an isolated, it might be applicable to a single site, but it's globally available. Cloud computing is where cloud hosting started to go to, and now we've taken a step past that, which I'll get to in a second, but it's the live processing of data. This is stored data, this is data sent to and from your site. So in parking, it's, for some vendors, it's spitting a ticket. It needs to, from that time that button's touched or waved, go to the cloud, get permission from the software, get the data, which is, in that case, time and date and barcode number, sent back to the site, and a ticket is spit. Now, I maybe exaggerate how long that takes, but I'll get to why I do that in a second, because there is a delay. If there's a cloud computing component to it, it is not instant. There are companies that'll have a smiley face, an hourglass, oh, please wait, where it takes a second to process that data. That's what that's doing, is it's computing the data. It's getting the data back to the site. There's also analytics of historical data, right? So business intelligence. We can run data with algorithms in the cloud that you don't have to sit down and manually enter into a spreadsheet. How many entries did I have at 8 a.m. on Thursday, 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m., 12 a.m., where we can compute and analyze that data and process that data without a human manual process. We are able to have algorithms written that give you business intelligence. So you know that your demand is higher at X amount, at X time at 9 a.m., 8 a.m. on Thursday than it is to come into the garage, than it is at 2 a.m. on Saturday, right? Now maybe 2 a.m. on Saturday it's busier getting out, so you're able to create and you notice that a lot of your service calls are broken gates at 2 a.m. because people are leaving the bar, they don't want to wait, so they run the gates and it's costing you money. So maybe you put the gates up and for Saturday night you decide to go pay on entry because that's easier that way, a flat fee is easier. So it gives you data and it analyzes data to allow you to make business decisions that are best for you. That could be cost reduction, could be efficiency, could be customer service. So I give a lot of central business district examples, but in healthcare, for example, maybe it's when shifts are changed, right? My wife's a nurse, so she gets to work the same time all the time. They work 12 hours. She gets in about 6:30, 7 o'clock. She works till 7:30, it's really 12 and a half hours, and then off they go. But that's typical for all departments. So maybe it's a customer experience that we're going for. So there's a lot that we can do that is no longer manual, which takes out human error, and it takes out a pretty tedious manual process that now your workers, your company, can allocate towards other areas. So as we get better at our jobs, technology is assisting us to get there. So I mentioned before, I kind of elongated a process of press a button, sends data, asks or requests data from the cloud, sends back, and then a ticket spit. But that's very real. So there's latency. There's latency because maybe your network's slow. Maybe the cloud tenant that you're on is busy at that time. Maybe there's a lot of data. You've got multiple locations. There's reasons for cloud computing to be slow. Maybe it's the distance. You've got it on old serial data converted to a Moxa device that then gets you out to the cloud via IP. There's reasons for latency. So that's the problem with cloud computing. I pulled up a picture of my vaccine card, and I had so many pictures since that it spun on my phone for a second, and it had to load that data from my iCloud because my phone only keeps so many things local. Bandwidth too. So we talked about network going out and cell redundancy. Does your cell phone work as great in a garage as it does outside in a park? No. Are there repeaters? Of course. But we're now adding latency because that distance it has to travel gets longer, right? There's more steps it's got to take. Bandwidth too. Bill's game. Your phone doesn't work as well down at the Ralph. They still call it the Ralph. The Ralph forever. The Ralph as it does probably 20 miles down on 90, right? So when you get a bunch of people on, especially there, a single cell tower, that bandwidth drops. So we need the ability to process stuff quicker. Security and privacy too. So especially credit card data, we want to do less across the internet and more at the edge, which is where I'm going with this here in a second. You just reduce the risk of interception at that point. PCI compliance, we've got rules in place, but they're not perfect. Facebook just got hacked and taken down for how many hours last week, right? Like, there's exposure. We just want to reduce as much exposure as we can. Connectivity too, obviously where there's lack of persistent internet connectivity. I was on a Zoom call yesterday. It dropped out twice in 5 minutes. And I'm sitting in my Airbnb and I had no issues the night before. No rhyme or reason for it, it just is what it is. And then artificial intelligence. So we need actionable intelligence in near real time, or we're getting delayed data. Now in our industry, probably not as apparent or needed that we need up to the second real-time data, but when we talked about healthcare before, that is the case. That could be the matter of life and death. So I mentioned here we want to make decisions at the edge. So where cloud computing has now gone is edge computing. So edge computing is when data is made what we call near the edge, closer to where the data is being created. Now, I'm going to reference, this is a very new topic to the industry, so I'm going to try to walk through this. If you're confused, let me know. But data is being, we talked about a distance that it has to travel, talked about latency, bandwidth, all these potential factors that could delay decisions and data analysis, all that stuff. So the closer to the edge where that data is created, the easier it is to process that. If you try to make a call, I have to call Vancouver all the time for one of our partner companies. Well, guess what? When I call Vancouver, it's got a lot of hoops it's got to hop through, and that call does not connect as quickly as it does when I call my wife who's upstairs with our kid, right? That's just nature. So we want to make decisions near the edge. So the edge in parking is the lanes. It's the space for guidance. So in other industries, it could be a heart monitor sensor. It could be data on the Wall Street's trading floor, something like that. But we want to make decisions at the edge because it's quicker. So I mentioned before in parking, it's when I wave for ticket, if you come by our booth and you wave for ticket, that ticket spits immediately. I'm doing what we're talking about here, edge computing, right there off of a hotspot. So what we're doing is making that decision with Tiba. It's at the master controller level. It's on site. So we hardwire all of our data, all of our lane devices back to our master controller, and that makes the decision. Those are called, in edge computing, our lane equipment. They're called sensors, and our edge device is actually the master controller. So edge computing promises faster processing because it doesn't have to go to and from the cloud. It's right there via an Ethernet Cat 6 cable, which is lightning fast. Anybody plays video games? That's what you plug it in. and you're getting reaction in literally microseconds. So this is me talking, right? But that's Kevin Scott, the Microsoft CTO, quote, "When we take the power of cloud down to the device, the edge, we provide the ability to respond, reason, and react in real time in areas with limited or no connectivity." So we talked about latency, we talked about bandwidth, we talked about cloud outages, we talked about network outages. That edge device, our master controller, allows for functionality of your garage without connectivity or anything. 100% uptime, period. You cannot promise that with cell backup. You cannot promise that with cloud computing because the cloud will go down. Amazon is who we use. Amazon goes down. You can Google a report. Microsoft goes down. Azure goes down. You can Google those. Those are very accessible by a quick Google search. So companies that do cloud computing cannot promise 100% uptime. So to kind of break this down visually across all industries, so you have cloud computing. We're going to skip fog computing. That's more of another layer. And then there's edge computing. So this could be, we've got watch, we've got a thermostat, we've got traffic lights, we've got your cell phone. We've got all kinds of different Amazon Alexa, Google Home, whatever you use. This is all where edge computing's done. Okay, so all those decisions are being made right there, right with you, not taking it, passing it, getting processed, coming back. So obviously the advantages of edge computing kind of nullify the disadvantages of cloud computing. So we have increased speed and lower latency. Doesn't have to travel as far. Doesn't have all these hoops to jump through. Doesn't have to get permission. Doesn't have to wait for a response. It's done right then and there by a piece of hardware. Improved network traffic management. So you're eliminating the number of data, the amount of data sent over a network. So your bandwidth doesn't affect that. It's literally all we're doing when we do connect to the cloud is batch processing or sending or receiving data at that point. Greater reliability. So there's no, I just talked about 100% uptime. That's not possible with cloud computing. So that doesn't matter whether there's a network or cloud outage. That, in our case, our MC60 bridges a gap for when the cloud goes down. So again, this year on opening day for Major League Baseball, Microsoft Azure had a 36-hour outage. 15 cities across the country, their first major event since the pandemic started in 18 months. All of anybody's equipment who was on Microsoft Azure gates up, period. Cloud was down, no connectivity. So now in our world, operators who are in the room, we're scrambling to find people to cover for that. Plus enhanced security. So it's limiting the amount of data transmitted over the internet. So really all we're doing is sending historical data at that point. In some cases we've got to send credit cards to process and stuff like that. But it's more secure than it was because not all of our data is being transmitted. So drivers for the edge. So we talked about we've got our IoT and devices. That could be anything that we have in our lanes that used to go to an on-prem, now goes to an on-prem edge, and then network, core network, cloud data center. So what we're doing is basically taking all of our sensors that I called our lane devices, processing, but you can see this is the key right here. So we're going from lane to on-prem device and back. Now, eventually, it's got to come all the way over here, right? That's how we're going to use our AI. That's how we're going to process our data and analyze all that. But it doesn't need to make decisions to function your garage. So I'm going to give you kind of maybe a watered-down version, a better way to do this, because this is kind of complicated. I guess this is my parking nerd side coming out that I studied this enough. So you want to think of cloud computing like Netflix. In order to access your Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Video, whatever you use, I need their cloud to be working. I also need my network to be working. If I don't have internet or Netflix, Hulu is down, I'm not watching my Bachelor in Paradise. I'm not watching my whatever show you guys watch. I need both, period. Not only that, but my login is accessing my data. I don't own my data. If you ever read the waiver terms and conditions, you don't own your data. You don't own that TV show from Netflix. You're going to access it. So from a data ownership, data processing, you need both, and you don't own your data. That's the other piece of that. With edge computing, think of it as your smartphone. I can access my pictures, like I said, a limited number on mine, because I don't like my phone being slow, but I can access my data, my text messages, my apps. I might not be able to send a text while I'm on a plane, but I can access my data here. And then when the network comes back, it stores it here. When the network comes back, or it stores it in the cloud, so when my network comes back when I land and I turn airplane mode off, all my texts come in a batch process. So in parking, what that means is you may not be able to process credit cards real time because your network's down, and you'll know that, but you can batch process when it comes back live. With that local device being there, our MC60, we can do 10,000 transactions offline. So that's a massive amount to mitigate that 36-hour outage for Amazon or Microsoft Azure, whoever we're using. So it's very real. This is not just parking specific. It's not Tiba specific. This is what's going on throughout all of the world. And as you saw, the Microsoft CTO, that is where they're going with their company. So as the leaders in the industry, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, healthcare, hedge funds we'll talk about in a second, that's where they're going. We're just benefiting from it in parking. So does anybody have any questions? This makes sense. I see a lot of nodding heads, so this is good. I haven't given this to a public forum before. So in Tiba, what we talked about before was we have our users. So that could be somebody getting a reservation, paying with their phone, whatever the case is. Our Tiba Smart Park, we have our Amazon Web Services. Then we have our edge devices. So that's a master controller. This is 3 different garages as a setup here, but this could be one master controller for 3 devices. And then you get down to our lane devices. So these are our sensors, our master controller, and then you go up to our layer here with Amazon, and then our users are the ones who are using the system. This is the key right here, our edge layer. That's the key with what promises 100% uptime. So I mentioned before, this is not specific to parking. So healthcare uses this. This is a healthcare example. So blood pressure monitor. We had our heart guy, as we were eating our brownies for dessert and drinking our Pepsi, telling us to be healthier. But he did give us a 2-drink allowance a day, which I thought was nice. So, but it could be sleep monitoring, blood pressure, fall detectors, body temperature, O2 saturation, all of that while you're in the hospital. But then they take it a step further, and it's cancer research, and it's all that, where we're processing that data in real time. So there are local notifications. So that's a notification that the cloud is down, your network's down, that this happened, right? So that somebody fell getting out of their bed in their hospital room, you get that instantly. All of that happens whether that device is connected to the network or the cloud or not, which is key, right? And then obviously we've got data storage, analytics, all of that stuff. So what this does is it allows decision making to come down to that local level. Hedge funds, I mean, milliseconds could be billions of dollars over the course of time with them. Car manufacturers, this is where they're going for the cars to make a decision. You don't want anybody's GPS. I mean, especially up here in the Finger Lakes, your service is not great. You don't want your GPS saying you're a road off, and then you run somebody over. We talked about accidents with scooters. Good luck with that with automated cars. So that's what car manufacturers are starting to do, is they're starting to get an edge device where all that data is analyzed and sent to their cloud. But when you go through a tunnel, I'm in Pittsburgh a lot. I drop every call I'm on when I go through Pittsburgh. That's the idea, is we need a local decision maker. That's how car manufacturers are going to get us to the point that there's automated cars. You can't have a satellite GPS system making decisions for us you're going to get that recognition of that sensor on your car, and then I got to send that up to a cloud and back in the middle of a tunnel in Pittsburgh? No way. And my car's not going to stop when there's a traffic jam. And believe me, there's always traffic jams in Pittsburgh. Scientists are using this for research, cancer, infectious disease, virology. That's a hot topic now lately too. So this is not specific to parking by any means. This is being brought to parking, but driven elsewhere. This has been around for a little bit. This is becoming more and more apparent. If you're into the tech world, more and more articles are being written about this all the time. But the idea is, why not benefit from it? Why not make your business as efficient as it possibly can be? Because what we're doing here, depending on your industry, is either revenue driven and or customer service driven. And you know, with customer service and revenue, a split second can be the difference in a complaint, a Yelp review. In some cases, like in healthcare, grant money is dependent on customer service reviews, those surveys that the hospitals send out all the time. In parking, it could be, we had an example today that credit cards were down at an airport. This is a couple years back, and the line took an hour and 15 minutes. People were trying to pay because they couldn't batch process credit cards. They had to wait an hour and 15 minutes after your how many hour flight home to get out of the airport. I don't know how somebody didn't run the gate. I think I would have at that point. So as other industries are perfecting this, and they have a lot more to lose, right, if this fails, healthcare's lies, hedge funds money, right? Car manufacturers is, you know, look what Volkswagen went through with what they did, but that's worse when lives, you know, we have recalls, that's awful, right? Scientists, how quickly can we cure certain cancers? How many lives can we save because we're making decisions that save days, months, weeks, years for COVID vaccine, right? Look how quickly we were able to do that. Now, there was years of research built up to that, but they're processing that stuff quickly in order to get stuff that's going to save lives. So absolutely not specific to parking, but parking is greatly benefiting from developments and technology that is being brought to done elsewhere with a lot more on the line than letting a car out and letting a few bucks go out the door. Any questions?
You mentioned the edge layer, and also talking about the Microsoft service technologies and so on. So, what is controlled to the edge? You mentioned payments, but could the gate situation be avoided, or?
Yeah, so in our case, it's our entire system locally. It's your entire garage worth of equipment. So if there's reservations in the system already, those are, whatever's in the system is there. So it's monthly parkers, it's pulling tickets. Payments will be batch processed when network comes up, so they're stored and forwarded. If reservations are in the system already, before that network went out, those would be processed and accessed. So it's everything that you really need to function your lane equipment. You would notice it because you get a notification, but from an operational standpoint, you'd have no idea. Your parkers would not know. Any other questions? Did I totally confuse everybody today? Do we have anything online?
We do not.
So I have confused everybody. That's good. If you want to stop by and I can show you, we've got some equipment. If you want to stop by and take a look at this closer. I benefit from this because my wife's in healthcare, but happy to have further discussions. Especially if you're a nerd like me, it might be fun. But please feel free. I have my card. Brad is here with us. He's our rep for New York State. So anything that we can answer for you, we'd love to. So if not, thank you for your time.